Yo guys, how's it going? My name's Phil. I am a photojournalist, photographer, video editor, transit user, and city lover. Today, we're going to start a new segment on this channel called Teachable Travels. At the end of 2024, I went on a trip to Ireland.
All the Americans are over here. Oh my God, I love this. I love Ireland.
On that trip, to my partner's chagrin, I spent lots of time observing, oohing, eyeing, and recording different aspects of Dublin's various transit modes and how they all operate. Now, I've done the geeky transit foaming stuff on other trips that I've been on, but this is the first time I'm making a video about it, and this will hopefully be a whole new chapter of videos on this channel. Now, the whole point is for whatever city I'm living in, which for the last decade has been Baltimore City in Maryland, to learn about the transit that I experience from other places in the country or in the world. Now, it would be unfair for me to apples compare Baltimore City to a European capital. So there's going to be plenty of caveats. I'm going to mention them throughout the video, but there are a lot of similarities, and I do want to touch on those. In Dublin, they have a smattering of public transit options, not all that different from Baltimore, actually. And as a matter of fact, Baltimore has one thing Dublin doesn't: a direct rail connection to the airport. Dublin alternatively has 2 local bus routes and a couple of express bus options that get you to the city center from Dublin Airport. Come to think of it, if you include the
Oh, hi, Mark.
Baltimore technically has 2 rail connections to BWI Airport, though the Amtrak rail station is basically just a parking garage with a shuttle bus. Anyway, in Dublin, the major modes of transit are
Whose horse is that?
the trams, local buses, the express and airport buses that I just mentioned, and their rapid and commuter rail systems. They also have a pretty good intercity rail system, which in reality is more of a countrywide thing, but we're still going to discuss it. First order of business, the buses. Something that rules about the Dublin bus network is their use of the iconic double-decker style. I'm a huge fan of the double-decker models, and while I know this is obviously not an American modus operandi and presents a whole host of other issues for American cities, it increases the capacity without having to add length to the bus itself or sacrifice ADA compliance space on the first level. And Dublin's made a lot of strides in terms of accessibility, but European cities are very old. A lot of world cities outside of the United States and Canada are very old and don't have a lot of ADA accessible features, but they are making a lot of strides. By contrast, Baltimore's buses are often full, which is great. We want the high ridership, but we don't have a ton of articulated, bendy-looking buses. There's 65 total when they're all in working order, so the buses we do run get fairly crowded fairly quickly. People like to say they love buses because they're cheap and they can get out of the way of drivers, but what they don't understand, and I would argue don't care to understand, is that you need a lot of drivers to drive those buses. And if you don't have that many, as we've discussed in my video on the Baltimore Link bus system, which you can watch here, you end up with a low ratio of drivers to vehicles that can cause your frequencies to suffer drastically. The Dublin bus frequency, and I would argue just about every other city's bus frequency that I've been to outside of Baltimore, is phenomenal. Dublin's even more so. One of the features that makes it so good is the wayfinding, scheduling, and transparency. This goes for basically every mode system-wide, but on just about every block in the city center of Dublin, there's 8-foot tall digital signage telling you down to the minute when the next bus will arrive. Now in DC, they have these digital signs that are kind of scattered all over the city, almost just exclusively at bus shelters, but Baltimore barely has anything like that. I've often noticed the big sign at Penn Station on the Fritz on several occasions, though the one at Charles Center is pretty nice, and the one in West Baltimore is also pretty nice and in working order most of, if not all of the time. Now, you got to give flowers where they're due. The MTA is very transparent through the transit app. Most transit agencies are. though. So you can't just say that that is a massive win for the MTA when that's kind of what you're supposed to do. There's just something about walking up to a bus stop and seeing a bus is 3 minutes away or 4 minutes away on an in-person digital up-to-date board that makes you feel like your city or your state is just doing the little things right. I say this a lot about the small quality of life things that you can do in a city or a jurisdiction to make people's lives easier. There's a reason why they are the most popular and the most electable. We traveled all around Dublin while we were there, not just to Temple Bar, and frankly, we never waited more than a few minutes for a bus. As a caveat, this has a lot to do with the routes and the fact that a lot of Dublin's tourist destinations just so happen to lie at where those routes terminate. In Baltimore, lots of routes terminate downtown and only a select few travel through downtown to destinations outside the core, where we have a lot of hotels, Airbnbs, and popular places for people to stay. For example, let's say you're staying at a hotel by Camden Yards because you're in town for an Orioles game, and you want to go to Fells Point to hang out with some friends and have a couple of beers. That's great. You can get a bus to Fells Point because the Navy and Brown and a lot of CityLink and Local Link routes go from downtown straight across the harbor into places like Fells Point. But let's say you're staying at an Airbnb in Federal Hill or Mount Vernon, or you're from West Baltimore or East Baltimore. Not a lot of those same bus routes that go downtown and then go east or west on a transfer are going to be as easy for you as, say, taking an Uber. The transit in Baltimore is way less reliable than Dublin. And in Dublin, even on a weekend, you're waiting no less than 5 to 8 minutes for a bus to an entertainment or tourist district. And if you miss your transfer, one is quite literally, honestly, no matter the time of day, coming in the next 5 to 8 minutes. If I was going from a place like Federal Hill or Mount Vernon to Fells Point, and I had to take a bus downtown to the Inner Harbor, and then I had to transfer and then go to Fells Point from downtown, my transfer may take 5 minutes if I'm lucky, if I timed it right, or it may take 15 to 20 to 30 to an hour. You never truly know, and that's why there is this disparity. That highly discourages visitors and locals from taking transit to do weekend activities, and it's one of the reasons many tourists and locals opt to just Uber everywhere in US cities, as well as one of the many reasons why lots of locals spend thousands of dollars a year financing a car. To be quite honest, in the US, there is a stigma about buses. Now, I've talked about this before, but it really does bug me. There's this underlying idea that they're just for the poor and undesirables who have no cars, and that they aren't reliable, direct, or frequent enough to carry suburbanites or visitors with enough money to just Uber, and who pretend their time is just more valuable than everyone else's. A lot of it is due to the fact that the state and city don't make resources available to mass transit because the politicians don't value it as much. Same as a lot of the people. Baltimore's buses do a ton to combat that stigma because they're the most used transit vehicles in our region, but it still, unfortunately, absolutely exists here. So what can Baltimore's buses learn from Dublin's? Number one, of course, is frequency, but especially weekend frequency. Baltimore's system almost exclusively operates on the notion that you're going to need a transfer to go places, which most bus systems do. But we don't have anywhere close to the appropriate frequencies to back that model up on days that aren't during normal work commute hours, which again makes traffic worse than it already is for drivers and bus riders alike. Number two, the signage. There is pretty poor time-relevant signage in Baltimore City when it comes to buses. The MTA does a pretty good job updating things via the transit app, but in-person transparency isn't just noticeably lacking, it's, for the most part, non-existent. That's not good, nor is it helpful for the many thousands of commuters who use the system daily, or for visitors who'd give it a chance if that little addition was actually made. And on that note, we have entered the rail portion of today's video. If you want to see the more focused videos that I did on the
Oh, hi, Mark.
and the Baltimore Metro subway link, you can view those here. We're going to start with the trams, which are called LUAS, which is the Irish word for the English word speed. The LUAS trams are what I would compare to Baltimore's light rail, and given that's the comparison, they have a ton to teach us. Firstly, something you'll hear me mention with every single one of these videos: headways, frequencies. It's a running joke on Baltimore social media that the light rail headways are, for the most part, abysmal. People sometimes post about the light rail only showing up once every 30 minutes or so, and while that's not always the case, particularly downtown in the AM rush, definitely have larger than acceptable gaps between trains a majority of the time. Especially, and I cannot emphasize this enough, for the mode that connects directly to an international airport. Seriously, you might as well just slap a Hertz or Enterprise rental car out on every light rail train at that point, because you're telling people that you aren't serious whatsoever. Now, Dublin's trams, LUAS, might not have a direct connection to the airport, but I'll tell you what they do have: headways every 5 minutes. Sometimes better, sometimes a little worse, but in Dublin City, LUAS headways are, by contrast to Baltimore's, absolutely phenomenal. A lot of this is down to my second advantage of the LUAS trams, which are these quasi-dedicated corridors through densely populated areas. These not only act as a mostly grade-separated path from general car traffic, but the buses often use them along their routes, and as any bus rider in Baltimore will tell you, dedicated bus lanes are a godsend. Now, one of the reasons that Baltimore's light rail doesn't get the ridership that it could is that it just doesn't serve very densely populated areas. When the light rail goes up Howard Street, there's nobody there. Hardly anybody lives along that corridor, and the businesses that populate that corridor are few and far between. But the thing about the LUAS that makes them popular is that outside of the core of the city, they get a lot of use because they go to population centers where people live. Now, you could argue that if Baltimore's light rail served a university directly, that it would probably get a lot more ridership than it does currently, weaving up and down the Jones Falls River and then dumping out into a parking lot in Hunt Valley. What the LUAS does is take people through some of the most desirable tourist, educational, and transit destinations in the city, which, I know this is a surprise to all of us, what a tram system is supposed to do. So what can Baltimore's light rail learn from the LUAS trams? Number one, of course, frequency. Unlike Dublin, we have a rail connection to the airport in Baltimore, but it's on the light rail, which has crappy headways and gets snarled in traffic fairly often through downtown. We also don't run trains that are nearly as long as the ones run in Dublin, so that drastically constrains capacity for the trains we do run to BWI, and most notably for the trains we do run to Camden Yards for sporting events. If we're going to have a rail connection from an international airport to downtown or from outside the city to two professional sports venues, it needs to run as often as Dublin's, every 5 to 8 minutes, and be made up of a lot more cars. That's a very tall task from an operational budget standpoint, but Dublin's a city of about 600,000 too, and they have far better headways through much more congested traffic than our light rail gets snarled in. And that is down to prioritization. Number two, dedicated rights of way. Now, as I said, the LUAS trams do get caught in traffic and stop at traffic signals, much like Baltimore's light rail, but the dedicated transit ways they have make up for that in spades. The light rail has to cross 16 intersections between when it enters city traffic at Mount Royal and where it exits city traffic outside of Camden Yards. Between drivers blocking the box and just generally not having a grade-separated path around the tracks, this causes a lot of headway issues for our light rail in Baltimore. Light rails are trains, and they're treated that way in the suburbs and even in portions of Baltimore City, but for some reason, not in that core part of downtown Baltimore. Makes people not want to take it because it's not as reliable as it could be. Number three, hugely, is capacity. The LUAS trams are long. Very, very long. Often Baltimore light rail trains are just a single carriage and have the look and feel of a trolley or a streetcar instead of a true tram or even a light rail line. This is especially a problem with Orioles and Ravens game days when the MTA often finds itself running shuttle buses because the capacity isn't being met by what trains they can run on the light rail itself. As I've said in the past, Baltimore transit frequency in comparison not just to European capitals but to other American cities is horrendous. I say that to give this example. We wanted to visit a seaside suburb of Dublin in the southeast on a Sunday afternoon. We discovered that the DART train, Dublin's rapid transit line, went to said suburb, and I held my breath as I looked up their frequencies online. And this is what I found. 10-minute weekday headways from 6:50 a.m. to 8 p.m. and off-peak trains every 15 to 20 minutes. On Saturdays, every 15 minutes. On Sundays, every 30. Now, initially, I considered the DART to be more of a regional rail type of thing. Because I was thinking that way, my jaw damn near hit the floor, which is why I'm introducing a massive caveat. After considering it for a bit, I do not consider the DART to be commuter or regional rail like.
Oh, hi, Mark.
It's one sort of branch line that serves an area not all that dissimilar in distance to what the Metro subway link does here in Baltimore. So that will be my comparison to this mode. Funnily enough, Ireland is actually going to get a real metro system off the ground, finally, and you'll never believe what they called it. Suck it, subway link name haters. Yeah, I know, I'm one of them. Anyway, what could the DART teach our metro subway link? Number one, of course, frequencies. The DART actually runs worse headways than the Metro Subway Link on Sundays. The Metro Subway Link gets lapped just about every other day of the week by the DART. It's really hard to beat trains every 5 minutes, and while the Metro Subway Link does some pretty good peak headways, it's definitely not good enough overall to beat the DART. After my video on the Subway Link, I saw comments from lots of people who take it daily who say it's not as frequent as it could be or should be, and for a piece of infrastructure MTA owns and operates without constraint from external forces, it just makes people a little discouraged to use it at all. Number two, and this doesn't have so much to do with the DART itself, but on transport infrastructure, Ireland and Dublin City putting infrastructure in the right places. The land use around the DART is far superior to the Metro Subway Link. In terms of getting people to ride it instead of driving, it's not even a contest. Yeah, there's parking lots, but not really park and rides like we have here. These places were well-established communities, but they never really took away from their respective central districts the way American towns did. You want to increase ridership, you have to give the train somewhere to go, not just a bunch of parking lots. That has to do with walkability too. The little towns that the DART stops in are walkable around the station. When you get off the Metro Subway Link in Owings Mills, you're getting off quite literally in the middle of a grade-separated interstate with not a ton of pedestrian infrastructure to make the time you spend when you get off the train all that pleasant. This has a lot more to do with the metro lines in the states that were built when the Metro Subway Link was as being commuter hubs. But the lack of stuff around our stations is absolutely taking away from the ridership in a huge way. There's even great bus connections in Dublin at suburban rail stations on weekends. That not only doesn't happen in Baltimore or its suburbs, but it doesn't happen in basically any US city or any US suburbs, period. On to commuter rail. The DART train headways are in addition to Irish Rail Intercity trains that run to places like Galway, Cork, Belfast, and Sligo, and to the commuter services which run more than 30 trains per direction per day on weekends, and nearly 50 per direction per day during the week. To put that into perspective, the Penn line, which runs the most trains of any service in the MTA's commuter rail arsenal, runs 25 to 28 trains per direction per weekday at peak. Those trains aren't even scheduled every 30 to 45 minutes like the commuter rail in Dublin is on Sundays. They're spread amongst a period from 5 a.m. to midnight, which means there's hour-long or more gaps where there's no local service at all. On the weekend, the Penn line only runs about 8 to 10 trains per direction. That's a third of the service the Dublin commuter train runs. That is baffling. So, okay, caveats for the commuter rail and the DART. Well, unlike Irish Rail, Maryland's transit administration doesn't have autonomy over scheduling because it doesn't really own the tracks that our commuter trains run on. On the Camden line, this means no weekend service at all, but on the Penn line, this means local service is just infrequent at best. Now, unlike the DART and Dublin commuter trains, the MTA has Amtrak to worry about, which is a separate entity from the MTA. By contrast, Irish Rail, which is in charge of the DART, the commuter trains, and the Intercity trains, run on the same tracks together. So what can Baltimore's commuter trains learn from Dublin's? Now, of course, my number one thing here is going to be frequency. Until the state of Maryland sorts out track ownership, it's obviously not going to be able to run the amount of trains Irish Rail can. But holy crap, could frequency solve a ton of our system's problems. For a city the size of Baltimore, connecting to a city the size of DC, running so few local trains, particularly on weekends when you could argue tourism to DC and Baltimore is at its highest, we don't run nearly enough service. Number two, for local weekend service to be better between Dublin and its suburbs than it is between Maryland's biggest city and the capital of the United States of America is not a good look. Now, you could just as easily say, well, Phil, you can take the Amtrak if you really wanted to get from Baltimore to DC on a weekend. And to that, I would say, you're actually right. That brings us to intercity rail time. You could fairly easily take an Amtrak train from DC to Baltimore's Penn Station, get there quicker than on the local services, and get back all in one day. The issue is, unlike Irish Rail, Amtrak uses what's known as a dynamic pricing model. You know dynamic pricing. It's what happens when you want to book an airline ticket and you say to yourself, well, why is it more expensive to fly 2 weeks from now than 2 months from now? Demand. Irish Rail, on the other hand, does not use the same model Amtrak does, so most of its trains are more reasonably priced in comparison. This means that depending on demand, Amtrak tickets could be $5 one way, $15 one way, or $85 one way. It means you can buy a same-day ticket from, say, Dublin to Cork City on Irish Rail, a 2 to 3 hour journey for about $45. Alternatively, a same-day trip from DC to, let's call it Newark Penn Station, two cities with similar populations as Dublin and Cork respectively and at similar distances, would run you around the price of an internal organ. I have half a pancreas for sale if anybody needs to get anywhere on the Northeast Corridor anytime soon. And this isn't even hyperbolic. For Dublin to Belfast, which is really the only other realistic city pair Ireland has that could compare to Baltimore and DC, Irish Rail charges just under $30 one way, same day, for first class and twice the distance. There are all of 0 first class or business class tickets available between Baltimore and DC for under $30 one way. Though, like I said, you could chance it with coach, but it might be pretty expensive anyway. But remember, you're only going half the distance as Dublin to Belfast, and there's already a $9 option on the Penn line. Even if you add the 28 trains per direction Amtrak runs between Baltimore and DC on a weekend to the 8 or so per direction the MTA runs, Dublin still runs more local service to its surrounding suburbs on weekends than MTA and Amtrak combined to 2 massive metro areas on the United States' East Coast. That is a very, very long-winded way of saying we have a ton we can learn. I'm not the type of guy that likes to harp on us being America, fuck yeah! But it should mean something that the United States is basically mediocre, if not completely subpar, at something as simple as high-capacity passenger travel. We are unfortunately not nearly as serious as we should be about giving people the option to take trains, even in one of the few areas of the country where it makes the most sense to do so. Look, to say we aren't looking to make changes for our trains and buses and regional rail connections would just be a lie, because lots of good work is being done, particularly with the infrastructure law passed in 2022 by Amtrak Joe.
But you see that sucker over there? 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds.
But we do have so much to do to bring our systems just up to par with the expectations Americans actually have in the Northeast already. Listen, I know that the Trump administration taking an axe to everything with a bunch of 19-year-olds and a crappy AI model is going to be scaring a lot of people into thinking that the future of transit is bleak. But now is the time for states to double down on it. And if you care about good public infrastructure in your cities, in your towns, it's time for you to double down on it. Take the bus or train or light rail to dinner. Go to the ball game to visit your family on public transportation. Go to school or go to work if you can on public transportation. Or even just go get coffee or incidentals at the store on public transportation. Pay your fare, don't stigmatize it, and open your eyes to what's really wrong with it in your city and in our country. It's time to open our eyes and open our hearts to using this resource to our advantage. Thanks for watching. Class dismissed.